All right, everybody, welcome to our last set of notes for this unit this week. We're moving into the 30s. We're moving pretty quickly. We characterize the 10s really as World War I, pretty much that whole decade, even though it didn't last the whole decade. The 20s are pretty much characterized as the Roaring 20s, as you saw in our last set of notes. What about the 30s? The 30s are what we call the Great Depression, okay? I think we have a pretty decent understanding of what the Depression part of Great Depression means, right? Obviously, a time of sadness, severe sadness. Depression here refers specifically to economic factors, referring to a depressed economy, not necessarily like people are depressed, but the economy is depressed. It is not doing well. But the sentiment is same sentiment kind of there. Great here does not refer to, wow, that's so great. It refers to size, right? The Great Depression, because it lasted for a very long time. It lasts from the end of 1929 to 1941. That is almost 12 years. Wow, that's a big depression. And so that's where the term great comes from. Historians don't look back and go, what an awesome time. That's not why it's called the Great Depression. I think you might have guessed at that, but I wanted to make that clear just in case. All right, so what is this, right? Here's our basic definition here. It's about a decade, a little over 10 years of economic depression. The economy and businesses are not making money. People are losing their jobs. People are not spending money, probably because they don't have it. So that's what we're referring to here. That's our kind of overall definition of the Great Depression. What causes the Great Depression? A lot of things lead us to this, particularly the ones on this page, but there are some on the next page as well. Poor spending habits. We talked about that in our last notes, our Roaring 20s notes. Noodles was out here buying stocks she couldn't afford. Okay, poor spending habits leading to the crash of the stock market on Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929. Now, you guys are lucky ducks because you're not taking the SOL. I've seen questions about the SOL, on the SOL about the stock market crash where they needed you to know this date. They asked you about, something to something September, right? And you were supposed to know that this was after that date. Don't even get me started. Luckily for me, you don't have to be that specific, although knowing 1929 is a good idea. Hint, hint. Some other causes of the Great Depression. We talked about banks failing and having to close because they ran out of money. People were not paying their loans back to the bank, and therefore, when people came to collect their deposits to empty their savings accounts, there was literally no money to be given out, and causing the banks to close. Don't worry, this can't happen today. Well, most of the time. Additionally, some other causes of the Great Depression. Other countries are not trading with us. We are not the only ones who fall into this economic depression. We talk about the Great Depression from an American perspective because this is a United States history class. But during this time, all around the world, countries are going through Great Depressions as well. Because their economies are not doing well, they're not worried about buying cool cars and new refrigerators from us. They're worried about putting food in their bellies and roofs over their heads. So we see a general decrease in global trade, which obviously means we're not making as much money as a country. We also, if you can believe it, have farmers producing too much food. I know it sounds crazy, right? But it's true. This leads to a couple of problems. Number one, it overworks the soil, which leads to a drought. If you didn't know, that's how you spell drought. It leads to a drought in the Midwest, meaning there's not enough rain and the soil is really, really dry. It basically turns into what we call the Dust Bowl. There were huge dust storms milling up. And, it's you'll see it in your America, the Story of Us. It's crazy. This is also a problem because producing too much food means that food prices go down, which sounds like a good thing, but that means farmers are impacted by this depression as well. How does a farmer make his money? He sells food, right? That's what he earns money on, selling food at a profit, okay? If farmers are producing too much food, that means supply is too great, demand is too low. That means prices are going to go down, okay? So this farmer who is used to selling his corn at, I don't know, I don't buy corn, $5 a corn, because there's too much corn out there, the prices now go down. And this farmer, instead of selling corn at $5 a corn, now has to sell corn at $2 a corn. So he's making less money. Well, he says, uh-oh, next year I need to make even more corn so I can make even more money. And farmers continue to produce too much food, destroying the soil, and also driving food prices down, which is good for everyone else and not good for farmers. There's also what we call an uneven distribution of wealth. Yikes, that's a big phrase. This basically means that the rich were really rich and they were only a few people, and the poor were really poor, and it's a lot of poor people. If you ever hear people talk about the 1%, that's what they're talking about, okay? There are only a handful of very, very, like, crazy rich people, and everyone else is not. Very decidedly not rich. That's what that means, okay? What is life in the Great Depression like? Many people lost their jobs. We call this unemployment because they are unemployed. They do not have an employment, okay? 25% of Americans during the Great Depression were unemployed. 1 in every 4 people, for every 4 people you looked at, 1 of them did not have a job. Now, you may not have a frame of reference to compare that to. Our most recent economic struggle in the 2008 era, we had unemployment around 10%. Typically, on any average day, we have unemployment somewhere between 4 and 6%, right? 25%. That is a humongous number. That doesn't address the real, or I guess all of the issues though, because many people had jobs, but they were much too qualified for that job, okay? We call this underemployment, okay? You are employed, you have a job, but it is under your qualifications, okay? So for example, a doctor working at McDonald's. Right? There's nothing wrong with working at McDonald's. But if you went to medical school for 8 years and have $100,000 in student debt because of it, you kind of want to work as a doctor and make that money where your qualifications are, right? Like I said, nothing wrong with working at McDonald's, but you don't typically find people with medical degrees. You don't find surgeons working at McDonald's. That would be an example of underemployment, right? This person is too qualified to work here, although he may still not be very good at making burgers. That is underemployment. Unfortunately, a lot of people had to go homeless. Homelessness was a major problem during the Great Depression because people could not afford to continue to pay their mortgage or their rent. So we have a huge rise in homelessness, families struggling to find food for their families, businesses are closing, banks are closing, farms are closing, and nobody is spending money anymore. The only time we're really spending money is on the necessities: a roof over your head, food in your stomach, the bare necessities of clothes, right? You're not going out and buying the latest Prada bag. You're, buying new shoes when yours have literally worn off of your feet. You're taking care of those basic necessities that you need: heat, etc. Here are some photographs from the Great Depression. This is a very famous photograph. Okay, this woman here with her kids. The kids are hiding their faces. And it becomes, I believe it goes on to win an award. But what's crazy about this picture is that this woman is, she looks quite old, right? She looks, worn and tired, and it might be the dirt. She Let me find exactly how old she was. If I remember correctly, she's like, here we go. She's 32. This woman here is 32. Okay. She looks like she's in her 40s because she's been worn down with the stress, with malnourishment, and all of the struggles that come with, the Great Depression. That's, depressing. Over here on the left, we have a soup line or a bread line. Okay. This is a way that a lot of people were able to get at least a little bit of food. You can see we've got quite a crowded line here. He's giving out coffee and donuts for the unemployed, free soup. This is a photograph from Chicago. And the person who sponsored this, notorious gangster, Al Capone. Interesting. He has a little bit of philanthropic persuasions there. We will, if you haven't already, you'll hear about Al Capone in our America, the Story of Us episodes we're going to watch this week. All right. We have some more pictures. Another version of a bread line here, except this one you can see is for children. They look like they're giving out soup. And then this is a photograph of men looking for a job, right? They basically have their whole resume on their, poster in front of them. Wanted a decent job. And he says, I'm a veteran. I have a home I'm working to pay on. I have college education. I'm from Chicago. I'm a decent guy. All right. I have a family to take care of. And so they're really looking for work here. Unfortunately, during this time, we see a huge spike in suicide rates for men with families, unfortunately. They really felt like the responsibility of taking care of their family was on their shoulders. And, by losing a job and not being able to care for their family, they really felt like they were useless, that they had failed their family. They had, lived a worthless life. And unfortunately, like I said, we see a huge rise in suicide rates as a result of that, which is very sad. Life in the Great Depression was bad, and everybody blames it on the president at the beginning of the Great Depression. His name was Herbert Hoover. What a name. There he is. I don't know who he quite looks like. But everybody is blaming him because he was the president at the time of the stock market crash. He had only been in office for 9 months when the stock market crashed. Now, there are a lot of ways that you could ruin an economy, but you really got to be trying real hard to ruin an economy to do it in 9 months. So it's very unlikely that Herbert Hoover was truly the cause of the stock market crash. It's more so based in about 10 years of poor spending habits and lack of financial regulations. So it's probably not his fault, but because he was in office at the time, he is receiving the brunt of the blame, unfortunately, for poor Herbert Hoover. He actually would have been probably a halfway decent president. He was a fantastic, what we would call a bureaucrat, somebody who manages organizations really well. So he probably would have been a decent president if it weren't for, all the years of poor spending that led to the stock market crash and kind of ruined his poor little presidency. Homeless people would live in Hoovervilles on the edge of cities, so they would set up basically giant shanty towns, basically like campsites where people without homes would live in like tents and like kind of makeshift houses using scraps of like metal and cardboard and wood. And they named them Hoovervilles as kind of like a dig, a rude way to get back at Herbert Hoover. They would also pull like their pockets inside out and like show the lining of their pockets. And those were called the Hoover flag. So again, they really didn't like him. They really put the blame on him for causing the Great Depression, even though it really probably wasn't his fault. All right, this is an example of a Hoover town. So you can see this is like on the edge of some sort of dock, right? We got ships smoking, steam engines, and this looks like some sort of factory thing over here. And the land doesn't look that great. It's hilly and bumpy, and it's probably got trash and rocks and grossed up. And we've got these makeshift little homes. This person's even put kind of a triangular roof on there. But you can see none of these homes look horribly well built. You know what I mean? They look like 3 pieces of tin that just got slapped together here. So these are shanty towns, a Hooverville, and definitely not a place to live. I don't want to be around this smoke. I don't see a tree in sight. This is not a happy place to live, or even a healthy place to live. President Hoover tries to get reelected. He runs for reelection, and he does not get elected. His opponent, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, runs under the campaign slogan, "I'll do something." That was his campaign slogan. I'll do something. He doesn't say what. He just says, I'll do something. Everyone was like, that's it. You're way better than Hoover. By the way, yes, he is related to our other Roosevelt. They are cousins. And so FDR, as we abbreviate his name, Franklin Roosevelt, in 1932 becomes the new president of the United States. And he promises to start working to fix the Great Depression right away. He calls his plan to fix the Great Depression the New Deal. The New Deal, that's what he calls it. There he is. We're going to meet FDR in another one of our tic-tac-toe assignments on Google Classroom. He was in a wheelchair. He had polio as a child, which kind of sort of paralyzes you. He could walk a little bit, but he needed a lot of support. He wore leg braces when he didn't want to use his wheelchair, or he would lean on his sons or his aides and that kind of stuff. So yeah, and well, I'm not going to spoil that for you. You'll have to do your tic-tac-toe. What is the New Deal? What is his plan here? He basically created a bunch of government programs and government departments, each aiming to fix one of the major issues of the Great Depression. So each department was set up to try and attempt to fix one of the issues from the Great Depression. Let's look at what these are. Okay, there are 4 that we're going to need to know. The first is the AAA. This stands for the Agricultural Adjustment Act. This addressed the issues of farmers farming too much. Okay, today AAA is like they help you, like if your car battery dies or whatever. That's different. This is specifically addressed at agriculture. Remember, agriculture is another way to say farming. The AAA paid farmers not to farm. No, I'm not joking. So they determined, okay, we still need to obviously farm, some farmers to farm. We got to get food going. So here's what we'll do. This, 50% of farmers, you guys are not going to farm, but we're going to pay you like you did, right? We're going to pay you what you normally would have made off of a regular season of crops. So you're going to get paid, but you're not going to do anything. These farmers over here, you're going to keep farming. We're not going to pay you. You're going to keep farming. But because half of these farmers are not farming, prices are going to go back to normal, and the farmers who are farming are going to make enough money off of their crops in order to survive. Okay? So some farmers are not farming and getting paid by the government. Some farmers are farming and making money off of their product. Okay? So this helps control prices of crops so that farmers are able to continue making money, and we have a little bit of recovery on our drought. Okay, so that's the AAA. Again, you're not taking the SOL. Usually all you really need to know about the AAA is what does agricultural mean, right? They usually don't ask too specific about what exactly the AAA did. So if you know it helped farmers recover, you're going to be pretty fine with the AAA. Okay, next is the WPA. This stands for the Works Progress Administration. The WPA worked to combat unemployment. What it did was order building projects on what we called public works. These are things that are general benefits to society. Things like better roads and highways, hospitals, public schools, libraries, bridges, etc. Things that everybody in society uses. So the government is creating these building projects and hiring unemployed people to build them. Okay, so not only are we improving society, but we're working on getting paychecks into the pockets of Americans. By getting this paycheck, they're able to afford housing, food, etc. Right? Many WPA projects are marked as WPA projects. I went to JMU, and one of the buildings on campus that my advisor had his office in was actually built by the WPA, which is kind of cool, right? So again, a public university is a public work, right? You're improving that public university for society. So just general parks, even, right? Things that make society better that everybody uses. Next is the SSA, the Social Security Administration. This is actually still around today. The Social Security Administration managed the Social Security tax, which is a tax that is taken from everybody's paycheck. Okay? I get Social Security taken out of my paycheck. If you work, you get Social Security taken out of your paycheck. That is something you are not exempt from. Okay? As what we call a dependent, right? You guys as kids, you depend on your parents usually for most of, your food and your housing and that kind of stuff. You guys do not have to pay income tax. So if you ever get income tax taken out of your paycheck, file a tax return and get that back. But nobody gets Medicare back or Social Security back. Everybody who works has to pay Medicare and Social Security. Social Security is money taken out of paychecks of people who are working and given to people who are unable to work, either for old age or injury. It gets a little more complicated than that, but that's the surface of what we need to know here, right? So money is taken from people who are working and given to people who aren't working because of old age or because of injury, something that is preventing them from working, right? They've, broken their back or they're paralyzed. Something like that, unfortunately. Okay? This sounds kind of crazy during the Great Depression to be taking money from people who are working, but giving it to people who are unable to work lightens the burden for a lot of families. At the time, if you had elderly grandparents that lived with you or a sister who was severely injured in a factory when she was a kid, you as a family are burdened with taking care of that family member, and you do because they're your family, but that doesn't mean that it's easy. By giving money to these people, Social Security, it's helping alleviate the burden of the people who take care of them. So now that family that's caring for their elderly grandparents have a little bit of extra money coming in from that Social Security to help pay for the care of their elderly family member. So that's where that comes from. Does that make sense? Okay, this is still around today. Like I said, we talked about that earlier. Everybody pays Social Security. This is still around today. And then the last one, and the other one that's still around today, is the FDIC. It stands for the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. This is basically bank insurance. Okay? What is insurance? It's something you buy into in the event that something goes wrong. Okay? So for example, think about car insurance. Okay? Every month you pay car insurance on your car if you own a car. Okay? In the event that you get into a car accident, you can use your insurance to pay for the cost of repairing your car or getting a new car. All right? So you pay every month, you pay a little bit every month, so that when something goes wrong, you don't have to pay thousands and thousands of dollars, right? You've been doing it a little bit at a time, okay? It can get a little more complicated than that. Like I said, you can get, denied for a claim, that kind of stuff. But what the FDIC is bank insurance. In case banks run out of money, there's insurance in the event something goes wrong where people can get their money back. Banks buy this insurance, and then if there's ever a time period in the future where they've run out of money and cannot give deposits back to people, people will not lose their life savings because of this insurance. The government will pay up to $250,000 through FDIC insured banks. Now be very careful here. The bank must have FDIC insurance. If they do not have FDIC insurance, they're not getting any money from the government. Whenever you go into a bank, there's usually stickers on the window that say FDIC insured. If you bank with any of the major banks, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, even some of the major local ones, I'm pretty sure Bank of Clark County, Wells Fargo, all those ones have FDIC insurance. Where you have to be careful are like the smaller, 1 or 2 branch local credit unions or local banks. Just make sure you see that FDIC sticker. You can even ask them, hey, are you guys FDIC insured? And you'll sound super smart. But should that bank fail, and they do have FDIC insurance, every person will get their money back up to $250,000. Okay, so if you have $10 in your bank account and the bank fails, okay, you're not getting $250,000. You're getting $10, right? They're not going to pay you more than you had in the bank. Here's where you have to be careful. Say you have $500,000 in your bank account and the bank fails. You're only getting $250,000. So if you ever win the lottery or come into a lot of money, you probably don't have to worry about it, but it's a good idea, just in case, to have different bank accounts with $250,000 at different banks. It's $250,000 per bank. So it's a good idea to have different accounts at different banks. $200,000 at Wells Fargo, $200,000 at Bank of America, etc. Although I'm not a financial advisor, so you could ignore me. Also, if you win the lottery, remember your favorite history teacher. Just saying. FDR is kind of an interesting person. FDR goes on to be elected for 4 terms as president. I know what you're thinking. How can that happen? FDR is the only president in United States history to serve more than 2 terms. Everyone before FDR served only up to 2 terms because George Washington did it. There was no law before FDR that said you cannot serve more than 2 terms. The only thing that kept people from serving more than 2 terms was George Washington. They respected him so much and his tradition that he set by serving 2 terms that's what the tradition was. FDR said, no, I need to keep going because we need stability. We got this Great Depression going on. We eventually get into World War II. He says the people need me. And so he ends up serving technically 3.5 terms. Spoiler alert, he dies in the middle of his 4th term. America loved him, though. He didn't steal these 4 terms. He just kept running, and people just like, yes, we love you, FDR. Go ahead. And he keep getting elected. He really kind of connected to the people. They felt like he really was helping them. They felt like he really was trying and he really wanted to connect with them. He would do this thing where he called fireside chats. So he would go on the radio, once a week or once a month and have these broadcasts where he would just talk about what's going on. He would tell people, okay, our unemployment rate went up this week, but I got this new bill that's going to go through Congress. We're working on getting more jobs for people to build these public works. We're also working on handling this bank issue. So he's having conversations and really reaching out to the people of the United States and being real with them about what's happening. And it was very calming for them. They felt like they were in the loop. The government wasn't trying to hide things from them. They felt like they had a grasp of what was going on. And it sucked, but at least they knew what was happening. And that was very calming for them. People loved him. People also liked that they kind of felt he kept his promises. So when he was running for his first election, he kept telling people, I'm going to do something. I'm going to do something. And he did. In his first 100 days as president, 15 major laws were passed. That's insane. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but it can take years for a law to pass. It can take literally multiple years for a bill to become a law. So for 15 major pieces of legislation, major laws to be passed in just over 3 months, that's a big deal. That's making things happen. And so, like I said, it made him look like he kept his promises because he said, I'm going to handle this. And then he did. And so people thought he was really honest. He was somebody who could be trusted. Joke's on them because he cheated on his wife with her best friend and then told her he wasn't going to see her ever again and then lied. Whoops. Anyway, Unfortunately, though, FDR's work wasn't enough to bring the Great Depression to an end. It lasts through the 1930s. We mark the official end of the Great Depression as when we join World War II in 1941. His New Deal probably made the Great Depression better. It probably would have been a lot worse if we hadn't had FDR and his policies through the New Deal. But the New Deal alone wasn't enough to pull us out of this severe depression. The only thing that could really pull us out of the Great Depression is war. Hooray. All right. Fantastic. That's our last set of notes. Finish all your activities and your study materials to prepare for the quiz on Thursday.